So let's look at the final part here, which is to do with inheritance and overriding a method. Now, inheritance is really all about the way that we can reuse objects and classes that we've already created. Well, specifically classes really. Now the language that we use here is we talk about child classes, and really what we do is with inheritance, the notion is that we already have some class, something in our library, and we go, okay, we want to create a new thing, and we're going to derive it from that existing design that we already have. Often we talk about specialization here, the notion that you have something and you're going to reuse this thing by adding more detail to it. In the object-oriented world, often we talk about the fact that a class inherits from another class. I think the easiest way to show you this is to do it by an example. So let's say that we have a person class. Now that's the person class that we've already created, and it has the three properties: first name, last name and age, and it's got those set and get pairs that we're familiar with: set first name, set last name, set age, and then the three accompanying get functions as well. And if you remember, those are the routines that we use to push information into the object and to pull information out of the object. Well, what happens if we come along and say, well, actually, what we really would like to do is to describe an employee. And we know that an employee is sort of similar to a person, so there must be a nice way for us to sort of reuse the person class in the definition of employee. And that's what inheritance is really all about. Now, the way that we would actually describe that in a diagram would be like this. And what we're saying here is that employee derives its design from the person class. So more specifically, employee inherits things from the person class. So what is it exactly that an employee would have that would be different from a person? Well, for example, an employee could have a salary and a position, and that would obviously mean that we would need some extra methods, some extra functions for an employee to do its work. So you can see we've got get and set pairs for salary and position. But of course, employee inherits from person. So an employee has last name, first name, age, salary and position. It has those 5 attributes along with all those accompanying routines. How do we do this in PHP? Well, PHP has this reserved word extends, and the way that we use it is we say, when we're going to define something which inherits from something else, we go class X extends Y. And what we're saying here is that employee will have all the things that will be inside person, and it has these extra things as well. And so we define our employee class in exactly the same way that we define our person class, by having vars and having methods, functions beneath it. But at the top we just have that special word in red here, extends, which says push into here, bundle into here, everything that's inside the person. So how do we create an employee? Well, it would look like this. We'd go new employee, and then in brackets, of course, we're going to use that constructor function to pass all the bits of information that make up an employee. So here you can see we've got Homer Simpson and their age and their salary and what job they actually hold. And we're going to create a variable called myEmployee. So we go myEmployee equals new employee. Employee is the class. Remember, it's got a capital E. And then in brackets, we just have all those bits of data that we pass in to the actual object to create a new employee called myEmployee. Now, of course, we had to do a little bit of extra work here because we're going to use that constructor class for an employee. So we're going to, when we construct a employee, we know there's going to be a little bit of extra information in there. What's that extra information going to be? Well, it's going to be the salary and the position. But of course, we also need all those other bits of information their first name, their last name and their age. So in exactly the same way that we're going to reuse all the different functions that we've already written, we can reuse the constructor class for the person. And what we do is we'll put that in that gap. So the constructor function for employee will call the constructor function for person and pass in those bits of data. So it would look like this. So if you have a look at that, we go function construct. So we're going to call the constructor function. It's going to have those 5 things inside it: first name, last name, age, salary and position. And then what we do is we call the parent. Now this is a bit of PHP syntax that we use here. Parent : construct. In other words, call this function in the parent class and we pass into it first name, last name and age. And then it does all that work for us because we're calling the constructor function from the person class. Position and salary, we can assign values to those as we've done in the other examples. Now the rest of the function will be, the rest of the class definition for employee will be the get and the set pairs. And that looks very similar to the get and set pairs that we saw in the person class. And the way that we would use it, we use it like this. So at the top you can see we create a new employee and we pass in the data, and then we can use it. We use that arrow notation to get information out and to set information if we were to do that. Now the only other thing to talk about here is what happens if you have a method which has the same name as a method in the parent class. So again, let's do that by talking about an example. Sometimes you have to do this because sometimes when you extend a class, when you inherit a class, you actually think that method's quite good, it's not quite what I want. Well, this is very similar to the way that our constructor function called the constructor function in the parent class. So let's imagine that we had a happy birthday method. So we could add this into person. What does that happy birthday method do? Well, let's just say all it does is it adds 1 to age and it just returns a message which basically says this is the new age. Okay, and that's what we do when a person has a birthday. We just add 1 to their age and we return that string that says this is the age. So if we were to use that, it would look like this, and you can see down the bottom here, print my person happy birthday. That will print out the string that's returned from that function. So in other words, it adds 1 to the age and then it just prints out the message about what the age is. So we've got our design of a person, we've got our happy birthday method inside that person. But then what happens if it's an employee? Well, if it's an employee's birthday, what they have to do is they actually have to buy cake. So we've got a different function but with the same name. So we've got 2 functions called happy birthday. We've got one in person and one in employee, and it doesn't matter that they've got the same name. And what will happen is at runtime, PHP will determine which happy birthday you should run. So if you create a person object and you call happy birthday, it will run the happy birthday in the person object. If you create an employee and you call happy birthday, it will call the happy birthday in the employee class, in the employee object. And that would look like this. Now, you may have realised there's a little bit of an issue here because the employee happy birthday doesn't increment the age. All it does is it says employees have to get cake. Well, what we're really sort of pushing at here is this notion that in fact what we really want to do is we want the employee happy birthday to call the person happy birthday. You know, that code already exists, and so sometimes what we'll want to do is we'll actually want to call the parent class. In other words, call the employee class which does the happy birthday and adds 1 to it. Now you might do that, and this is very common. Sometimes you may not want to do that. You might want to completely overwrite. You might want a completely different function. In this instance, it's fine. We can call happy birthday in the person class to do that bit of work. And that's what that would look like here. It looks exactly the same, because all that's really happening is it's now adding 1 to the age and saying those people should get cake.